Well, I don't have much money, and I don't have much time, and I don't have many friends I could call mine. And I've been deceived, yeah, but haven't we all? I've seen the sun rise, and I've seen the sun fall. Well, I don't know why, and I don't know where, and I don't even know how, and I no longer care. But I've seen your face, and I've heard your call. Yes, I've seen the sun rise, and I've seen the sun fall. I've seen the sun hang like a flame in the sky. Yes, I've seen the sun turn, and I've seen the sun die. And I often think now, before our time is run, will there be any thoughts for what we have done? Well, I don't have much money, and I don't have much time, and I don't have many friends I could call mine.
Hello and welcome to another SDAQ&A. My very special guest today is the book editor there at Signs Publishing, Nathan Brown. How are you, Nathan?
Doing okay. Doing well.
That is good to hear. And I think this must be at least your fourth time on the show.
Yeah, had the privilege of having a chat a few times.
Yes, and you've been on a couple of panel discussions as well, which I've appreciated. So welcome back. And I just have 2 or 3 quick announcements to make. I won't be here for the next 2 days, unfortunately. I'll be away in Melbourne at a festival. And so sadly, we won't be having our weekly gospel program, and we won't be having another guest this week. I had slated in Bob Wolfgram. Nathan, you'll know the incredible human that he is, Mr. Bob Wolfgram, with about 3 PhDs under his belt. And I've asked him to come on next week, and he's going to do that. So that'll be good. And I think we've got, I've just got a mental blank who else, but I'll let everyone know later. The other thing, a lot of people have asked me what's happened to the Tyler Morgan video that we did last Thursday night Pacific time, Friday lunchtime here in Australia. Sadly, it had a big copyright strike on it. Normally, I can refute those and make them disappear within 24 hours. For some reason, this one is persisting. I think I managed to have my counterclaim accepted, and I think if you watch that, maybe you can watch it this week, because a lot of people missed out on watching it because it was just taken down or muted worldwide. So if you've missed a gospel program last week, you can watch it this week. So that was the second thing. There was a third thing. I'm sure that will pop into my mind at some point, and we can chat about that as well. But welcome, everybody. And as I said, welcome to my very special guest, Nathan Brown, book editor at Science Publishing Company. We are going to talk about this book that is Nathan's new book, Do Not Be Afraid. It's a devotional book, but in many ways it's more than that. But I do love, and we were chatting a little bit off air about this, how you can systematically work through your devotions and your worship in a disciplined way, or a systematic way. I don't mean any of that to sound like it's all hard work, but I think it's important to be able to face our day with some kind of devotion. And so this is a great book for that, and we'll look into that. One of my first memories of you, Nathan, was many years ago, some music thing or a rally, and I think you might have spoken a bit up the front, and I'm talking maybe 25 years ago. Young bloke. I think he had a nice sporting an afro at the time, maybe from memory. I can't remember for sure, but I remember that you stood out as someone that had a real passion and a burden for social issues. And what struck out to me is that in Adventism, that's quite rare, because we have been quite insular in our approach to our own social issues and rarely step outside. And so it really stood out to me at this rally. I think it was up in Brisbane, maybe. You were talking about social justice issues regarding the planet, not just within Adventism. And you've kept that up the whole way through. And I think that's an admirable thing. And we've chatted in the past how, you've found that to be a challenge at times within the church, but I'm sure that people find that a challenge within any movement if they're trying to be progressive and make things happen. So at the moment, what kind of social justice issues are you have you got on the plate that you're kind of involved with in some way, or are you more head down, tail up, focusing on your work at the Signs?
Well, I guess my next book project I'm actually writing at the moment, which I haven't talked about in public, although I have shared some of the basic ideas about it in a few different settings, is a book called Practicing Justice. And some years ago, I was actually invited to speak at the Interfaith Prayer Breakfast at the Australian Council for International Development. And amidst all the agencies that are a part of that gathering, there is all these, there are quite a bunch of faith-based agencies. And one of those that Adventist context would be familiar with would be ADRA. But almost any other church agency, but also Muslim-based agencies and Jewish-based agencies and others are all part of, they kind of have their little side meeting, prayer breakfast, in the context of their national conference. And I was invited to come and speak at that event. And the topic that they gave me was, we're all faith-based agencies. How can we actually connect people that work with our agencies who aren't necessarily formed in those faith traditions? How can we connect people with the faith roots of what we do? And that was something that I worked on quite a few years ago, but it's one of those things that's quite echoed in my head, because a lot of the work I've done in the church context has been saying, these are people that have got faith, and these are people that I think need to have a stronger focus on justice. Whereas in this context, we start with justice, and then what I'm trying to do, what I tried to do in what I shared, but what I'm trying to do in this writing project is to talk about how faith can offer us a resource and a guide, and I guess roots to the work of just doing justice in the world, and that that can shape our advocacy work or activism work, but it also can help it become more sustainable and be something that, because working for justice in the world is pretty stinking hard work and can feel like you're losing at least as much as you're winning, and some days you feel like you're losing a whole lot more. So how can you do that in a way that's sustainable and that also doesn't destroy ourselves? And one of the things I've actually come across is stories of activists who have given into despair, whether in just giving up, or actually even amongst some suicide, when the work that they haven't done. And there were reports after the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020 and all the protests that were happening there, and all these particularly younger people who were becoming a part of this kind of uprising for justice, and then nothing changes. What do you do with that?
And even betrayed in many ways by the very organization that was starting out. Yeah.
And so people can become burnt out, disaffected, disenchanted, and despairing in those kind of situations. So what can faith bring to that work? How we grow our roots deeper, and become people that can love even in the face of loss, even in the face of adversity, setbacks, and even in the face of violence and threats of that nature as well.
Yeah, I will very much look forward to that when we can maybe have another chat when that comes out.
But on a more immediate thing, this weekend I'm actually heading to Canberra with an organisation called Common Grace, Canberra being, of course, Australia's capital. And Common Grace is a coalition of Australian Christians working for justice, and where I've been invited to be a lobby group leader with that for some meetings with elected representatives in Parliament House next Monday.
Wow.
And we're particularly focusing on Indigenous justice issues. And one of the key things, and this is a live issue in many parts of Australia at the moment, is there's kind of this international, but also has been agreed understanding in Australia of a commitment to raising the age of criminal responsibility for from 10 years old to 14 years old, as in this is the age that you can be put in jail. And that's a pretty heavy kind of thing. And of course, we've seen in the Northern Territory a new government elected there who has actually put the age back down again to 10. And, this is such an abuse of human rights. We get to the point of that an Indigenous young person is 29 times more likely to be incarcerated than a non-Indigenous young person in Australia. And that isn't, that's there are cultural and social issues, not merely legal or criminal issues that are involved in that. And so, what we're calling for is for our elected leaders to take more responsibility to actually say, hey, where we need to address this on a national level, and respect the rights of children, and respect the rights of children and respect the rights of Indigenous people in particular, who are the ones who are most disadvantaged by this policy. So that's one thing. We're also have a strong focus on climate justice and some of those things. So that's something I'm doing immediately this week. If you want to find out more on that, look up Common Grace. And hopefully some more people can join us next year.
Yeah, that is really good. And it's good to see that you are still right at the cutting edge, the forefront of this stuff, as you were when I mentioned I first crossed paths with you at least 25 years ago.
Yeah, I might have once been young and hopeful, and now I'm less young, and
less hopeful?
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, one of the things when you were talking about your next upcoming project or book, you were using the word "we." I mean, I'm assuming you're meaning, getting Adventists positioned in alliances and being more able to form networks with other denominations and other people even in the secular world that are doing these social justice things. Yeah, how I've noticed in some of my dealings with Anglicans and Uniting Church over here in Australia, even the Baptists, they almost have kind of an organised forum within their churches to deal with this stuff. You mentioned ADRA. Outside of that, is there a governing body or a department within Adventism that is there to look at social justice and community issues that you speak of? Or is that left to the individuals like yourself?
Ideally, I would think that a lot of our, all of our church departments should have a focus for ministering in the context of the social needs in relation to their particular area. So, a youth department should be concerned about youth issues. A children's department should be concerned about issues that are affecting children. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily how it works. And we tend to be quite insular in our focus a lot of the time. So I'd love us as a church to actually have a much greater focus on some of those kind of things. I think it would be good for us. It would be good for the community and society around us to see us, that we can make a contribution to those places being better places and that treat people better. And I think that it certainly should be, if we listen and learn and focus what we do on people who most need change to be made in our societies and in the communities around us, then it can be good for the people who most need that change to be made. So that's, I think there are many reasons why it should be something that we prioritize in a greater way.
Yeah. Have you thought about, or have you already got your own sort of independent ministry Facebook group or something that can network a lot of the Adventists with a lot of these outside sources that you deal with? That it seems to me that'd be a really valuable resource.
So one of the things we have been working on, and we went public with this earlier in the year, is an organisation or network called the Just Love Collective.
That's your thing, is it? That one?
Well, I'm a part
like
of it.
one of your. I mean, you're a part of it. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. And so that's a collection of Adventist activists,
Right.
and we have had smaller groups like the Adventist Peace Fellowship, the Adventists for Social Justice, even Spectrum, and you've referenced and had Alex Carpenter on this. And the good work that he's doing. But Spectrum was a part of that, is a part of that coalition. Even Adventist Today to a degree, and Kinship from time to time. And there's one or two others that we've partnered with as well, with this view to saying, okay, we've had all these little groups. Can we kind of build a larger network?
Yes, good idea.
And one of our challenges is that a larger network of very small groups is still not a very large network. But we held a conference at La Sierra University in May, at the beginning of May this year. And, we're able to, connect with some good people, particularly in that region around La Sierra University and Riverside and Loma Linda and some of those places. But the other thing we have been doing, which is probably the most obvious thing at this point, is we put out a monthly e-magazine called Pulse. And if you go to justlovecollective.org, you can download free and join the mailing list there. So if people have an interest in that direction or want to connect with some of the things that are already happening in that space, there are some good things there that people can engage with.
That's great. And yes, I remember now in my chat recently with Alexander Carpenter, maybe you had your ears burning. We were talking about you, and he did mention that and your involvement with that. It just had slipped my mind. So yeah, and as Paul Kelly in his song wrote, "From little things, big things grow." Yeah, so good on you guys. And I was cajoling him and others to get organized, and like you say, with the Just Love, with some of the stuff Kinship's doing, with Spectrum, with AT as well. That is beginning to sound like an organized approach, which I think is going to be beneficial. I remembered what I was going to say earlier, and it did dovetail into you. I noticed a lot of people joined our Facebook group this week to watch the program today, maybe not realizing they can also watch on YouTube. However, the Facebook group, the comments are there, and there's a lot of engagement that goes on afterwards. And there must have been at least 20 to 30 people that joined this week knowing that you were coming on the program. And I wanted to remind everybody that we're only, I think, maybe 40 subscribers away, or members of the Facebook group away from reaching 3,000 members. So wouldn't it be great if we could do that in the next few days? So if you're watching and you're watching on YouTube and you haven't joined our Facebook group, go over there and find it. There's a link in the description. So yeah, thank you for that, Nathan, encouraging extra membership this week. And that was good. And the other thing I wanted to say, and those that might have just joined us, there won't be programs on this week. Unfortunately, I will be away. And as I'm leaving for Melbourne today at about 2:00, our interview has to wrap up early, which I know Nathan is a fan of.
It's good to have you with some parameters, Peter.
Yes. Yeah.
I did have one thing I was going to bring up with you, was our shared experience in the past week or so of the world's biggest worship band. And you went to the Sydney gig, I went to the Melbourne gig.
Yes, and see what I still have on my
there you go.
on my wrist. You probably can't see it. Coldplay, the world's biggest worship band.
So I call one of the reasons.
What an experience!
What a show! That was quite an amazing piece of. And I happened to. I had the. What's the right word? I went to 2 of the shows in because I was volunteering with Global Citizen, which is the Coldplay's favorite charity.
Well, that was one thing I wanted to raise. They have so many charities that they before they come on. It's brilliant. The QR codes up on the screen. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So my wife and I volunteered to do some street work with them, with the crowd. As they were coming into the stadium, and connecting with people and connecting people with the good work that Global Citizen does in anti-poverty work, and that was a really great experience too, and just having an excuse to talk to all these random happy strangers, having a fun night out, and signing them up for something good, and but that also got us into the gig, so that was a nice little fringe benefit.
Fantastic.
And I described them as a worship band simply, partly because Chris Martin actually grew up in the church, and I think
which church?
A church.
A church, right? I thought for a second it was going to be a Prince and
no
moment.
I'm not making any claims like that. But he grew up in church, and as I understand it, his parents were worship leaders.
Wow.
And so that
explains a lot.
A lot of the ways that he interacts and seeks to get people involved, and the sing-along kind of factor, and the way they work the crowd and all those kind of things, just so fit.
Very, very much so.
In fact,
he uses what a lot of worship artists use as a pad sound underneath, so the between tracks you can hear that just soft, gentle chord still playing. And when he got, I don't know, you might have seen the Sydney show, he got a couple up just on the circle in the middle of the whole place, and he sings a song to something like, there might be to someone passing away or someone they've just lost, and this couple they wanted him to sing a song for their old dog on its last legs, little puppy, and so he sang that song, but I heard him say to the sound guy, change the drone to key of E, please, and then the music faded, and you suddenly realised there had been this soft drone like the worship leaders use, and then in came the key of E, and he sang this song for them.
Yeah.
So yes, that explains a lot. Can I just play a quick? I might get a copy strike.
There you go. And having heard you play that song a few times, Peter.
Yes. And there I am with Renee.
Yeah, cool. Good, clean fun. But yeah, I mean, there's something, even from we were talking worship-wise, there's something worshipful in, well, it's not necessarily worship, something human in singing together with 60,000 people and
yes,
and enjoying songs that are about love and hope and goodness.
Yes, yeah.
Well,
I think he even opened with the new song "Pray."
Pray, yeah.
Pray, I mean, and Fix You, and they're just uplifting. And then right in the middle or near the end, they do that quite big social justice kind of song there.
Yeah. And I'm a big
but
fan
nothing beating over the head though. Everything was done respectfully and with inclusion. Yeah, it was if people get a chance, go and watch Coldplay. It's how church should be.
There's certainly, I mean, I'm not sure we could do those kind of, and there's a lot of show to it and a lot of production that's just putting on, a lot of gimmicks, I guess.
A few backing tracks.
But yeah, there's something, something good about people trying to do something good and doing it well.
I agree. And look, that's a great segue into your recent book, because it was funny when I saw this advertised, or you promoted it on your Facebook, and I'd been looking for a devotional book that wasn't to beat you over the head, to be able to read to my daughters, as you saw just there, me and Renee at the Coldplay show. That's just a nice positive devotion that's systematic. I can read it a little bit every day, and then so I was looking for something like that, and then up comes your book. So I want to talk a little bit about that, but just quickly, and I know we've only got another half an hour, and this is one of the shorter episodes, but when you look at social justice, and we had the big election there in America last week, how did you feel about that as you saw the outcome? Was it expected? Did you think it was going to go that way? And then wrap up this question with your thoughts on Ben Carson. No doubt you've met him when he was here in Australia that time. What was he like? Do you feel confused that an Adventist can be so supportive of Trump? I did a program on this the other day on election day, to test the crowd, and in some ways the SDA community is very much split down the middle on that. So I just want to know your feelings on that and your thoughts on Ben Carson and his political / spiritual role.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that the election was a surprise. It was a significant step backwards for almost everybody, but it's not a surprise. The topic of the devotional book is not unrelated, in that so much of our politics is about stoking fear, and there's one reason that fear is used in the way it is, whether it's politically, commercially, in advertising, or even in evangelism, is that it is a cheap way to get a response. And so when you have people that are predisposed to fear, as we all are in our own different ways, it's hardly surprising that fear tends to win in a short-term sense. It's not a very good way to build anything, but it's a good way to provoke a response. And there's a part of us that shouldn't be surprised when fear wins. But yeah, I mean, the the outrage and the injustice of the election is not that that when you put two things up and one, people have to choose between one or the other. It's not. It's less a surprise. The problem is when one alternative gets treated as a legitimate and equal alternative to the other, because in both the elections that Trump has won, he didn't belong on the same stage. He didn't belong in the same argument or paragraph or sentence, and is just not. He's not a leader. He's in any meaningful sense. He's a huckster and a used car salesman, basically. And so that's when, once he gets put into that system and gets given some kind of, facade of legitimacy and is treated by the media in that way, you've got someone who doesn't believe in the system of, reasonable discussion or, talking about policies or any of those kind of things. It's, that just doesn't even belong on that stage. And so the stage and the people that are talking about it and the people that are even voting on it don't know what to do with that. And so, he's broken the system, a fair and sensible political discussion to the degree that existed. And so, it just doesn't produce positive results. And so it's, it's been a interesting, there's a lot of it to play out, unfortunately. But it's a challenge that we will have to, that the world will have to continue to work with. And, the reality is that nobody knows what Trump is going to do. 60% of the people who voted for him, according to some surveys that were done, don't really believe that Trump is going to do what he said. And that's a pretty interesting insight into, the fact that, he talks a lot, he says all sorts of ridiculous things that make no particular friends or no particular sense. But then almost everybody in the room agrees that he probably doesn't mean it anyway, and it's a nice show. So anyway, that's my little bit of amateur political punditry.
I was disappointed that the Kamala side played into that, using fear as a tactic as well. Their whole I've got to be careful saying certain words because you literally get muted for saying words. But they were, alluding to him being equal to a not so nice, nasty leader of the past, and also calling his followers FAC extra, the other word, part of that word. It's amazing, isn't it, that I can't say that there's those couple of things I will get muted. But yeah, I literally got banned from my Facebook group SDAQ&A about 2 years ago for using that FAC word in a sentence. I was disappointed that they stooped to that level instead of trying to win on the goodness side of things.
Well, one of the critiques that was levelled at Harris, particularly earlier on in her campaign, as such as it was, is that that it was a vibes campaign. Yeah. And the reality was that the other side was similarly vibes. It was just bad vibes. So, it's not... there hasn't been a really decent discussion of alternative political policies or anything like that. And, we probably don't expect that in the world as it is, as political campaigns have evolved. So, it's one of the problems is, and I was at a training thing a few years ago where they talked about the idea of values priming. And one of the real challenges that you have is when you win on fear and bad vibes, that's what you actually create. And if you're looking for a particular outcome, if you're trying to motivate people to vote or to engage with something, the way you do it isn't as important as what you're actually trying to get them to do. And so when you're, if you're priming people to, fear and, racism and misogyny and some of these other things that are sometimes part of these kind of campaigns, that you actually are creating, to some degree you're responding to a mood. That's how these things happen. But there's also that you actually are at the same time creating that mood, and that makes it really hard to do something good, even if you're pushing towards a good outcome. If I'm, and we're talking about the context of fear and do not be afraid and some of those kind of things. If I'm doing evangelism by fear, using fear as a tool for evangelism, the reality is that will have people that come through that process who are a different kind of, even if you get the good outcome that you're after, it will change the nature of the people that who respond to it, but also the nature of the people that go through that process. And so that's a real challenge, and I guess raises some real issues and questions for the way we do our public conversations about things that matter. Is that we actually shape the outcomes by the way we do it. And even just to just take a step back and look at the bigger picture. One of the things that I've studied to some degree is the idea of nonviolent resistance in social movements, and that was a really interesting, and some interesting ideas as far as one comparison that's been made is Gandhi and the work that he did in India compared to the work of the uprising in Nigeria, one of those West African countries around the same amount of time. And not only was it far more effective, or was nonviolence far more effective, it is also far more likely to create a positive society after the revolution or the change of regime. And so one of the challenges and opportunities that we have is that the way we do things matters. And the way we engage in the world, the way we engage politically, the way we engage socially, the way we engage evangelistically and faithfully, all of those things make a difference in the outcomes that come afterwards. So I think that we need to be suspect of people that will use the worst of us, that will try and bring out our worst, even if it is to achieve what might be considered a good outcome.
Yeah. Well, we could go off on a whole side thing here, but I think it's important that, the author of Do Not Be Afraid demonstrates that he is not afraid. Again, I'm seeing in the comments that it's dividing everybody again. And it's a very difficult time, that's for sure. And I think, as you're saying, the tactics that people use, and again I highlight, I wasn't pleased with the Kamala tactic of reducing people to, I'll say the word fascist because I might get a strike on it, but hopefully not. I think that's playing dirty in a way that I think backfired. Like it was such a landslide win. All of the 7, what are the states called again? The deciding states. I've just got a mental blank. Yeah. The swing states all went to Trump. He got the popular vote. And I think maybe you saw it coming in. That's why you were mentioning there's a little bit of a reason you did call it "Don't Be Afraid."
Well, I mean, in the in the introduction to the book, I quote a survey that was done of Protestant pastors in the United States. And they found that I think it was 69% of pastors felt that their churches were becoming more fearful. And that, that's, and I kind of feel like that's a little bit of a contradiction to what our faith pushes towards. And do not be afraid is the most common command in the Bible. And I think that's kind of significant. And the fact that I think there's two things that we can take from that. Firstly, is that I think the Bible is very open to the idea that being afraid, feeling fear, is a part of our human condition. It's what it means to be human in a sometimes fearful and broken world. And so that's the Bible acknowledges that. So I don't think this is about making us feel bad when we feel fear. Adding this kind of extra layer of guilt that, I feel afraid because I don't have enough faith. That's not, I don't think, what the Bible's message is about. It's acknowledging that, hey, you feel fear at many points in your life. One of the most, significant direct statements was, when Jairus, the synagogue ruler, had come to Jesus in Luke chapter 8 and said, my daughter's unwell, can you come to my place and spend time, heal my daughter. And Jesus got held up on the way because he paused to help somebody else. And then the messengers come from Jairus' house and says, hey, don't bother Jesus anymore because, your daughter's died. Jesus turns around to him and says, do not be afraid. And, I don't think that Jesus is telling him off for feeling bad in that moment that his daughter has died. It's actually a message of comfort. And that, C.S. Lewis in his book, A Grief Observed, the opening line is, nobody told me that grief feels so much like fear. And he then goes on to describe the physical sensations of grief and how they feel the same as fear, that pit in our stomach, the hollowness that we kind of feel in our chest, the dryness in our mouth, all of these kind of things that are, those moments when we get that terrible news. And we've all had those kind of phone calls in our life, of somebody that has passed away and that our lives will be different. And so the voice of Jesus in that moment, his first word is not to tell somebody off, but is to simply say, is a word of comfort, is do not be afraid. And that's that recognition that, even Jesus, the story of Jesus is simply that we have God identifying with our experiences of fear and grief and loss and uncertainty. That is what is the lived experience of our world. So that's the first thing. But the other thing is, let's not run our lives on that. Fear is a bad thing to make choices upon, on the whole. Maybe there's good things when we react to a dangerous situation and step back from it. That's probably not a bad reaction. But as far as a guiding principle for our lives, C.S. Lewis in in the Screw Tape Letters makes the comment that courage is the point at which all our convictions and our values matter. Because it's only when we're doing something that scares us that we're actually being tested. If I'm taking a risk by being honest, by confessing to something I've done wrong, or, that's when the courage to actually be honest in that moment is when we are our best selves, when we are good in a moral kind of sense. And so this is the opportunity that we have, is to live above, and the calling that we have is to live above this kind of base level of fear that is pushed towards us by so much of our society, is that people of faith live above fear and have an opportunity to choose differently, choose to live differently, and choose to lead with love rather than fear in our relationships in the world around us, in how we respond to in our personal relations, how we respond to issues and people who are different from us in the community around us and in the world around us. And so courage, this do not be afraid, is actually a key component of what it means to live and to love well in an uncertain and sometimes dangerous world. And, our faith gives us some kind of eternal perspective that can help us do that. That means we can afford to lose. That means we can afford to live well and to live better.
I'll just bring up something Hal said, which was great. Hal's been a guest on the program and done a gospel program or two for us. Why would we need to be afraid? Our past is forgiven. Our future is 100% secure in Christ.
Yep.
Rochelle, by the way, Rochelle, to contact me, I'll send you my email address. Rochelle had just asked about that earlier because we're going to get her and her husband on the show, I hope. Cross fingers. That's what my SDA community taught me. Fear equals not enough faith. And that's one thing that I think is perhaps for another conversation, but it's important that we have these dialogues here. And I think one of the good things about this group is that we have diverse range of guests and a massively diverse range of responses. But you guys get to say what you think. You might like what Nathan's saying. You might not like what Nathan's saying. But I think at least we're saying it and we're having the dialogue, which I hope people value. When I got the book and which is available in Australia, by the way, and New Zealand and all the ABCs, and I think you can get it online on Amazon as well.
And it's available in all the ABCs in North America
as well. Awesome! Wow, that's great.
So it was published in North America. So that's it's actually imported over here.
Interesting. I didn't know that. And I have been reading it, in order all the way through. I like that that routine and that system. But at the start, I was just flicking through it. And this one kind of jumped out at me.
I'm struggling to read, so you might tell me what it is.
Jesus Revealed.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a bit out of focus there. That stood out at me because for me, when I left the Adventist Church, finding my identity again, finding my way in the world, and finding a lot of support, but also a lot of kind of pushback and also a lot of who am I again? I found that the common ground place for me, and I've said this a million times, so I apologize, I'll say it quick, was to stick just to the four Gospels and the teachings of Jesus. That way I could just focus for me, my healing journey. That was my core start. And for anybody who is struggling with things and theological things and political things, it's a really good way to just ground yourself.
Yep.
And so I naturally, as I'm flicking through this, I came to that. And I don't want to put you on the spot because it's so many pages in this book. But if it comes back to you, you start off with a text from Luke 5:8 when Simon Peter, which I also felt connected to, he saw this, and I think this is about the fish, the good catch of fish, and he fell at Jesus' knees and said, go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man. I'm not worthy. I'm these kind of things that a lot of humans and a lot of us struggle with. Do you remember enough to say what Jesus's response was to that, which does play into the next part of that?
So the genesis of this book was actually a master's course that I was doing a few years ago, which was a deep study of the book of Luke. And we simply went through Luke chapter by chapter over the course of the semester. I had to write responses on every chapter. And then at the end of the semester, as these kind of things go, you have to write a paper about some theme or idea or topic that caught my attention. And this is where the do not be afraids of Luke caught my attention, because it keeps coming up from the Christmas story to the resurrection. Every time something significant happens, there's a do not be afraid. And this is one of them, which is, Peter has this kind of epiphany of whatever's going on with Jesus here, I'm not quite worthy to hang out with him because, and so he says to Jesus, get away from me. And so But Jesus' response is, do not be afraid. And then, now you'll follow me and become a fisher of men, or whatever exactly that line is. And so this is, to me, a core message of, I think there's something in that moment, in that experience, where Peter is responding in that moment, and Jesus is saying, hey, we don't have to, this doesn't have to be the end of our friendship. It can actually be the beginning of something new and wonderful. But I think there is a bigger picture of these do not be afraids that are so much a part of Jesus' story, is that it goes back to the basic human condition described in Genesis, where, because of the broken relationship between God and humanity, it went from being something where, in that telling of the story, God and humanity walked together in the garden. And this particular day, once that relationship was broken, their response was to hide from God. And, we heard you coming and were afraid, says Adam in the story. And so what we see there is these relationships that are broken, and that the story from there of, this is big picture of the Bible, is simply this recurring, God is not someone to be afraid of. Do not be afraid. Every time God turns up to do new things with his people, whether it's, Moses at the burning bush, or it's, the prophets, the Hebrew prophets, but most fully and completely embodied in Jesus is, do not be afraid. And that to me is almost a summary of Jesus' key message that he wanted to share. And it's in his teachings, it's in his miracles, it's in his life. And the circumstances of life, which wasn't, cruisy. It was that his life was threatened from beginning to end, that he did meet a horrific and public execution. But even that, his message is that, in me, we are bigger than that. And so we can choose to respond differently and to live, faithfully and lovingly in this context.
To wrap up, can you share, in these many daily devotions, what were some things that stood out for you? Can you share one or two? You don't have to say which day and date it is, but what were a couple that just really stood out to you?
Yeah, well, firstly, I think that the totality of it all is one of the things that I'm trying to get across to people. It's actually been said, and I'm not sure where some of these things come from, but that there's 365 do not be afraids in the Bible, one for every day of the year. In writing this book, I went looking and I reread most of the Bible to do that, and I couldn't find 365. That's just a bit too neat. But I think there's a couple of hundred. And so with a couple of hundred, it is the most repeated command in the Bible. And so one of the things that I'm trying to share with people who will work their way through this book is simply that it's something that comes up a lot. And it's something that is a recurring thing, because I think we do need to be told it more than once. We need to be reminded of it perhaps on a daily basis.
Yeah.
But I also think that that there is the bigger, there is our approach to faith, that God is a God of love, not a God of fear. And there are some key verses that, make that very clear. And some of the comments have touched on some of our Adventist approaches to how we present and share faith. I mean, one of the things that we have to realize is that, the first commands of the book of Revelation are, write this down, it's important, and do not be afraid. So everything that you read after that, and I guess the other very significant guide to reading Revelation well is that it's about Jesus. So put those three things. It's about Jesus, it's important, and it should not make us afraid. That should really shape what we do with the book of Revelation. And that, there's a book we've put out recently by Dr. Daniel Renault. You ought to get him on and have a chat to him sometime, called Jesus Not Beasts. We just published that a few weeks ago. That is trying to do some of that work of rereading Revelation pretty closely, but through this lens that this is telling us something about Jesus. That's kind of worth some attention. So, yeah. And I think there's probably, there are a lot of those kind of poster verses that, nothing can separate us from the love of God. Romans 8. And, there are those kind of things that don't necessarily directly talk about, use the phrase, do not be afraid, but they have that sense of assurance. And I think that that's such an important thing, for living faithfully and well, is simply, and, as Paul puts it, if God has given you Jesus, how much more will he take care of everything else? And, I guess one of the things that I would hope that people take away from spending a year with this, if that's how they choose to use it, is that kind of sense of assurance. The sense of God is for us. God is on our side, and that is most fully expressed in Jesus. That is our intention for, God's intention for our lives and for how our world will ultimately be. And, and I just think that, there's a great quote from Frederick Buechner that I like, where he simply says, "Here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Don't be afraid." And that's simply the world that we are called to live our faith in. And, to be honest, I think that we have an opportunity to be people who think differently. There's one of the great do not be afraid is Isaiah 8. And it's talking about how we can connect with, it's a message from the prophet to the people who at the time were a city surrounded by enemies. And they have this kind of, the message that comes through the prophet Isaiah is simply, don't think like everybody else does. Don't measure things in the world around you the way that the politicians tell you to, and the way that the advertisers tell you to, and even the way some, other key voices in our society and culture would push us to. But actually, and one of the lines in it is, don't get sucked in by conspiracies. That's not how we're called to live. We're called to live by, the assurance that God is God, and He will keep us safe in the best sense of the word, which doesn't mean that life goes beautifully and swimmingly and smoothly for us, but it's simply that amidst the challenges of our world, that amidst the challenges and disappointments and sorrows of our lives, that we have this bigger picture and this bigger direction and orientation.
Yeah, well said. And I encourage people to go and buy this book. It's not a political book; it's a devotional book, and it's a great way to just connect with a daily sense of worship and devotion, minus all the politics, minus all the religious ideologies. And I recommend people go and check out Nathan Brown's new book, available all around the world in all the Adventist book centers and on Amazon as well. Thank you so much, Nathan, for joining us today. Thank you, everybody who has been watching. Again, I won't be here for the rest of the week, unfortunately. I'll greatly miss our weekly gospel program. I am trying to set it up so that people can do that whether I'm here or not. So watch this space. But appreciate you all so much. Have a great rest of the day. Thanks again, Nathan. We'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, Peter.